Hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. I won this game about 5, maybe 10 minutes ago, and I finished it against the computer. My opponent resigned a lost endgame. Said differently, my opponent resigned an endgame that I had the win, and there was nothing wrong with the timing of it or anything. I just decided to mention that. So here's my game against Jeff Non, and I have the white pieces. So technically this is considered part of the French defense. And when queen takes d5, it's actually the most common response I find online here. It looks like white is doing very well to the tune of 58%. And let's see which games those are in. Those are all within my games, so it's a small sample size and it's incredibly biased as such. So let's take a look if we find. Those are master games. No, I'm sorry. Those are master games. Yeah. All right. And throughout the entirety of chess.com, it's not all too different from that. After knight c3 here, chess.com users are scoring 88%. That's white. But that 88% doesn't jive at all with 54%, 40%, and 6%. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. This might be frequency, how often that move is chosen rather than how well it fares. Okay, that makes more sense than 54% with a 6% draw rate. Okay, all right, pretty cool. That's cool. In a good way. And so back to my game with my opponent. I might even just how badly did I push around the broadcast windows? Not all that badly. Hey, here's me on DK mode. Any of you guys ever play GoldenEye? Yeah. In DK mode, the heads of the characters were larger than twice their bodies. It's a good mode for License to Kill too. Depends on what you like, but if you're playing License to Kill with pistols or automatics, the head is so huge. Boom. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, so back here in the World League game of chess, I played c takes d5, queen takes d5, and then of course knight c3, right? This has themes common to the Scandinavian defense. I think there's the Scandinavian opening, I think the Scandinavian defense, with the knight coming to c3 while also gaining a tempo on black's queen. And now usually black will play either to a5 or d8. Queen's e6 is a good choice as well. This is almost like an invitation for a queenless middle game, and I'm okay with that. So I played queen to e2, and it'll be difficult for anything but queen swaps to result from this arrangement. And now it's for certain. But queen takes e2, bishop takes e2, and it's a queenless middle game. White is ahead in development, but also has the only Isolani on the board. This is pretty darn close, I'd say, and it's black's turn to move, so pretty darn close to even Stevens, as they say. And here, let's see what black has. About 2/10 of a pawn of an advantage by way of the evaluating engine torch 4. Knight f6, d4. Some just strong developing moves. Both sides want to get some pieces into the game. I took this risk. Knight b5. Some complications. The downside of these complications aren't all that bad. Like here, I would think bishop takes d2, king takes d2, then I move like knight to e4 check. Has me scratching my head as white. Probably bring the king back to e1 rather than expose him so boldly on e3, where in just a moment's notice the rook can come to e8 and there's a discovered attack brewing. So yeah, I would bring him back to e1 and he won't be able to castle, and that's kind of a little bit better for black, and that's why the evaluation bar sits at half a pawn better for black rather than 2/10 of a pawn better for black. Little nuances like this. So bishop takes d2, king takes d2, and we see the move knight d5. And it's not the best move. The best move was at e4, but knight d5, protecting against knight c7. Not only winning the pawn, but without the knight there, also the rook on a8. Perhaps the pawn in exchange, perhaps the pawn on the rook, depending on whether the knight can return safely to play. Either way, white will be doing very well. So instead of that, black plays knight d5, protecting c7. I think it's important to note here too, a lot of these opening attacking themes that feature knight on b5, could be on d5, but that's usually more difficult. With the knight on b5, looking at the c7 square, the king might still be on e8, the rook might still be on a8. Well, yes. The king does not have to be on e8, right? Rook takes c7 is so often claiming, knight takes c7 is so often claiming the rook at a8, surely out of the rook's being trapped. Can't move. This rook cannot move next to the a7 pawn and the b8 knight. Both the black a7 pawn and the black b8 knight. So you can trap this rook sometimes, even if you can't win the rook through a proper fork. All right, that's it. And then the pawn is its own deal, of course. But if you're attacking with this motif in mind, which, mind you, for black is something like with not that knight though. With black would be a knight on b4, looking to go to c2 with this kind of fork. So often the rook is trapped rather than actually forked, or sometimes both. All right. That's all I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to say. That, and one more thing about these tactics. Knight a6 is sometimes it's an awkward, maybe a little clumsy or clunky countermeasure, but knight a6 does indeed defend c7. So sometimes you can pursue your own aggressive options, perhaps on the king side, after playing knight a6, and rest assured that your opponent's knight won't be able to capture your rook in a move or two or three. Knight a6. It's this sort of like patchwork defense, and then you get going with some aggressive plans, or whatever kind of plans, really. All right, so knight d5. It's given an accuracy. I don't think so. I mean, maybe it's not perfect, but it's not that bad a move to protect on c7. Perhaps knight a. Yeah, so I guess I might be going towards that point. Perhaps knight a7. Perhaps knight a6 was a little bit better. You keep the first knight here on f6, and he's helping to control the middle, and he's strong. The e8 square might be important in certain positions where the rook comes to e8, and then the knight on b8 is not as strongly in the game as when on a6. So it's not like you're ruining this knight and his development on the chessboard. You're just sort of making it a little bit less smooth, right? Bishop f3. Just attacking the loose piece. And black is going to skate out of this or skirt out of this just in the nick of time, as Taylor would say. I play. I'm gonna play. Bishop takes d5 anyway, and my opponent can double his Jeff. My opponent can double his pawns um, to capture my knight all the while. And I think I disagree with the engine here and say that white is maybe just barely better here, so slightly better for having the king is actually active here. Remember, this is a queenless middle game. We're not all that worried about getting checkmated right away. White's plan is clear: either knight e2 or knight f3, both to protect d4, and the king can hop in and be a part of that protection too. It looks like black has this great half-open file on the a file, but we'll see this in the game. White is timely and accurate to play a3 before any brouhaha or hoopla or ballyhoo can occur along the a file. White has a clearer plan, more development. You could say more control of the center, but d4 is as much a target as anything. And black has the only set of doubled pawns, and they're sort of like mildly bad because however bad they are can be repaired by c6 at any time. So I think white just has a slight edge. Also, lasting pressure against b7 and along the h1, a8 diagonal. Right now it's black's turn to move. Black would probably love to play something like bishop f5 or bishop e6, but not right away because the pawn on b7 will be captured immediately by white's light squared bishop. Knight c6, knight e2. Straightforward defense, and we can, like I said, we can add the king to that. There are even versions where you can add one of the rooks, but it's not the end of the world if that pawn is captured. But well, it actually is a pretty important pawn, so let me go back and take that back a bit. Now here, I was tempted for a bit to play d5 before I realized the pin. Rook f to d8 or rook a to d8 would be too strong against white's attempted fork. So instead I decided to rupture black's pawn structure and take back a well-developed knight from c6. That knight was strongly positioned and now he's gone. But not only that, we can start to apply pressure. Well, in a moment, like I said, a3 will occur, and this effectively closes, at least for now, the a file to black's rook. Does it? Maybe, because rook a4 actually looks pretty strong. But regardless, we were talking about the potentially attacking pawns here as well. So rook a to c6, just emphasizing that I don't need to babysit the a pawn anymore. So rook a to c1, as it's rook a to c1. Bishop d5. I had some ideas of knight to f4. I didn't like how the knight's kind of hanging out there. Knight to f4, then maybe that was a little bit better. I'll consult analysis here. Knight f4 was a better move. I'm sure it's a little bit sharper. And with bishop c4 and king c3, get into some close quarters complications here on the queen side, over on the queen side. Alright, so instead I played a more direct way to stop bishop's attack along the a8 h1 diagonal, and just to close it with another pawn, pawn f3. This bishop's hitting into trouble. g5, the dual purpose of starting to get black's king more active and claiming space and pushing pawns towards maybe maybe an eventual promotion. Take the long-range piece in favor of my knight, but also expose this sort of... I mean, technically these pawns are not doubled or fractured or even disconnected, but their arrangement on the board is so weak, especially that white's king is safe from on the d file. White's king is safe on the d file from attacks, and so I played a really good move. Rook c5, attacking 3 pawns at once. Doubling on the c file is super easy. Retreating, if necessary, is super easy. So this is all around flexible, strong move by white. And here I might have played rook h to c1. And I thought, well, black can actually, I don't know if I thought that then, but I'm thinking now. Rook to b7 will protect the c7 pawn. That's a second time, and keep these doubled rooks at bay against winning any material on the c file. Winning any material on the c file. So instead, I placed my rook on e1. And then when I play rook to e5, 2 rooks on d5 might be enough, and rook to g5 check is definitely a threat. So one way or the other, it looks like white is going to win some material here. I think it's only bound to be 1, but 2 is likely as well. Let's see. Rook e5, rook after king f8. King f8, it might have been strong to play f6 here for black. Protecting a pawn, guarding a square that is needed for white to attack the d5 pawn, and the king gets into the action sometimes one move earlier because he's on the 7th rank when he moves to the f file instead of the 8th rank. Big pawn to f6 is strong in that position. In fact, don't really see that great of a plan for white after the move pawn to f6. We'll just leave that on its own then. From a practical standpoint or a human standpoint or both, pawn to f6, maybe white could try rook e6, get scared away by the king, but then have a way to transfer over to the queen side. Well, I don't know. Anyway, my opponent played this just really slight mistake. It's not even a mistake, it's an excellent move, but I think f6 is just slightly better. Rook takes d5, rook takes d5, rook takes d5. Wait, no. Yeah, rook takes d5. Rook takes d5, rook takes d5. And c7, pawn to c6. Pawn to c6 is indeed a kind of a bad blunder. Look, with the pawn still on c7, the black could play rook b7 and just maybe hold on. Probably not though. His pawns are disjointed. Not in a technical way there's only 2 pawn islands. White has more pawn islands, but I don't know how to express it. Maybe backward pawn, backward pawn, backward pawn. So they're just not as flexible as black would hope, I'd say. But then pawn to c6, and it's Rook fork shows up for white, gathering another pawn. So we're checking there, then bring my king to the defense of the d4 pawn. Kind of hurries black on the king side. They start to shut down on the queen side. You find that black is overpowered by the existence or presence of 3 extra pawns for white. So my opponent chose to resign, and I thought it was a respectful point in time to resign. And I thought my opponent Jeff played an excellent game. I had a blast during this game, so thank you. And that's it for this broadcast. Thank you, viewers. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm More Gravity. Have a great night. Oh, one thing. I like to view these highlights and see if these are showing up correctly. Nope, not correctly. Not by anyone's fault, but my own darn giant portrait there. So this was the game in terms of highlights from the computer analysis. Chess.com does an awesome analysis, my friends, and I urge those who want to take the game seriously to start analyzing some of your games. It's not going to be everyone, but especially maybe start with the games you're most proud of. Wow, I really played an awesome game. Analyze it. It might be like, hey, I played. You might get to, I played a blunder and a mistake, and 4 inaction. But that's part of it. That's why I said if you're taking your game seriously, use the analysis. It's so very helpful, and also thanks to chess.com for providing such an awesome service, or is it a service? Feature, really. Technically, it's a feature. All right. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm More Gravity. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm More Gravity. Have a great night.